RAD-140 is better than Anavar? Psych, it's not. Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. I'm Dr. Downey, and today we're going to compare one of the most popular oral steroids to one of the most popular oral SARMs, which is RAD-140 and Anavar. And in this video, I'm going to compare them and see how they stack up against each other in terms of their ability to cause anabolism as well as their side effects. So I'm doing this more from a health perspective. I don't promote either, but this is essentially to show those who are taking RAD-140 or are considering it that perhaps it's not the best choice to make. So in terms of their anabolic abilities, I had to do a very complicated calculation, which I'll show you above, because they were never compared in studies, and there are no human studies done on RAD for anabolic abilities. There is a human study, but they didn't look at anabolic parameters, so I had to look at a rat study and compare two rat studies, one in Anavar and one in RAD, and they looked at the weight of the muscle in the pelvic floor, and that's how I'm going to compare their ability to cause anabolism. Because if the muscle at the pelvic floor of a rat increases, it means it's probably caused by the drug that they administered. So again, they're two separate studies with their methods were a bit different. So instead, I just compared how much anabolism each dose of the drug caused with regards to the control in each study. So it's all relative, just so that I can compare the two. So obviously this part is a bit confusing, but feel free to skip. I had to extrapolate quite a bit of data, but essentially I used these two studies. The first being that this one is commonly referenced all the time when looking at anabolic abilities of different drugs. So this was for Anavar to see how much Levita any growth that it caused in relation to control. And then for SARMs, I used this study where they did it in rats also. And so I'm going to compare their relative capabilities to each other. So they both use different types of rats, however both were immature rats. But I try to control as many variables as possible. So essentially we're going to be looking at how large the Levita ani, or this pelvic muscle, grew in regards to the control. So let's start with RAD-140. So in this image you can see I highlighted something called the sham. This is essentially the control where nothing happened to this rat and they just weighed the Levita ani at the end of the study. And that's how much it weighed. It weighed 190 milligrams. So then we look at the RAD-140 groups where they put varying doses of RAD-140 into these rats, and then at the end of the study they measured how heavy the Levita ani are. So I highlighted 30 milligrams per kg and 3 milligrams per kg, just because these two numbers can be found in the older Anavar study, so we can equally compare the two. So if you look here, the 30 milligrams per kg group caused an increase. The weight of the Levita ani was around 320 milligrams. If you divide that by the 190 milligrams that we got from the control, this means it's 1.68 times heavier than control. So we're going to compare that to the Anavar group. But also let's look at the 3 milligram per kg group. In this, they're around 310 milligrams weight gain divided by 190, so it was 1.63 times that of the control. What's interesting to note from that is that you do not get more benefit out of RAD-140 as you increase the dose above 3 milligrams per kg, it seems. That's in rats, you'd have to convert that value to humans. So in the Anavar study, if we look here, I highlighted the Anavar section. They did it a bit differently, but if you essentially look at the far right, it says 2,000 micrograms per rat per day, so I had to divide the weights and convert it to milligrams, and this 2,000 micrograms per rat came out to be about 30 milligrams per kg, and if you look at the 200 microgram group, that also came out to 3 milligrams per kg. So we could compare the two. So and if you look, the control is the bottom left, that's its weight or relative weight, and we're going to essentially make this divide the values by the control just to make it equal. So in the 30 milligrams per kg group at the end, it was 64.7 divided by 27 is 2.4 times that of control. Remember, in the 30 milligram per kg group at RAD, it was 1.68 times that of the control. So essentially, Anavar is much stronger at this dose. However, if we look at the 3 milligrams per kg group in the Anavar group, it was only 1.64 that of control, and it was 1.63 in the RAD. So at lower doses, they seem to be as anabolic. However, as the dose increases, RAD loses, well, doesn't lose its anabolic ability, it just doesn't gain any more. However, Anavar does. So their suppressive abilities, if you watch my Anavar only video, you'll see that Anavar is mildly suppressive, and recovery does occur fairly quickly depending on duration and dose. With RAD-140, there aren't any human studies done, but there are anecdotal reports of RAD being quite highly suppressive in the community. A lot of people know it to be quite highly suppressive, and this is of your testosterone and your pituitary or gonadotropins. So this is where it becomes interesting, the health effects. So they used high doses of RAD in hormone receptor positive breast cancer. Remember, breast cancer has different flavors, so don't overgeneralize and say, oh, this drug can cure cancer, because there are different types of cancers. So this was hormone receptor positive cancer, that's triple positive, triple negative, HER2 positive, things like that. So they wanted to look for the maximum tolerated dose in humans. And this is the only human study, so I needed to find a comparable human study in Anavar. And I did come across one, and I made a video on it, and it is this study where they essentially did the same thing, try to find the maximum tolerated dose of Anavar. Well, they didn't try to look at that, they just gave the patients 200 milligrams of Anavar, which, for those who don't know, is quite a lot. What is interesting, though, and you should keep this in mind, is that in the RAD study, these were early stage cancers where it was end stage cancer in the Anavar study. As opposed to the RAD being early stage, the Anavar one had spread to the bones, liver, and things like that. So the dosages used, RAD's dosages range from 50 to 100 milligrams to 150 milligrams, and they compared the dosages to find the maximal tolerated dose. And in Anavar, they just straight up used 200 milligrams daily in 20 patients. So the duration of the Anavar study was up to 108 days, and for the RAD study, they did cycles of 28 days. So, and the Anavar one was much longer. So just keep all of this in mind when comparing them for yourself. So what was interesting to note, out of all the RAD patients at varying dosages, obviously the higher the dose, the more frequent the things occurred, but they happened in all dosages. That half of the RAD patients had elevated liver enzymes, and by elevated, significantly elevated liver enzymes. And in the Anavar study, if you read the study, you'll find that none had changes to liver values, despite the fact that a few had liver metastases, which is liver spread. But that, again, kind of makes sense because Anavar is resistant to, quite resistant to metabolism by the liver. There was the same incidence of nausea and vomiting in both groups, indicating that both at a certain dose are quite toxic to the gastrointestinal lining. But overall, in the RAD group, 72% of all of the participants complained of some sort of gastrointestinal disturbance. In terms of kidney problems, there were 23% of the RAD patients had kidney issues, and 60% of these kidney issues were acute kidney injury. But this is the confounding variable here, is that a few had dehydration, which would predispose you to acute kidney injury. But what was interesting in the Anavar study at 200 milligrams is that there were no kidney problems. Furthermore, there were psychiatric problems with RAD-140, and that was anxiety and insomnia. Anxiety has been reported in some Oxandrolone studies, but not in this one. So the maximum tolerated dose of RAD was calculated to be about 100, and for Anavar it's just less than 200, because 200 was a bit too toxic. But what was surprising is they said that Anavar was toxic, even though the side effects were nowhere near as bad as those in the RAD studies. The side effects were just nausea and vomiting. So it's quite interesting how they defined toxic or maximal toxicity back then. So it's just interesting to note that the patients had cancer spread and had used 200 milligrams for 108 days with nowhere near as severe side effects as those who used RAD for 28 days at these high dosages. So RAD is commonly used at much lower dosages though, like 5 milligrams a day up to 20. That's a maximum, I think. So the side effects will probably not be as pronounced. But again, the anabolic capabilities at those lower dosages seem to be equivalent to that of Anavar, and Anavar at those dosages haven't really displayed any liver toxicity, whereas RAD at 50 milligrams still had liver enzyme issues. So I'm not promoting Anavar, I'm just saying its safety profile and anabolic capabilities would suggest it's a better compound to use over RAD-140, especially since RAD-140 is still experimental. There are study limitations with RAD. There's only one human trial that I could come across, and a phase 1 trial, and it's difficult then to form safety profiles and build up these profiles, drug profiles. And you have to rely on anecdotal evidence, whereas we have meta-analyses on Anavar. So Anavar is definitely safer in that you know what you're getting. So in summary, Anavar seems to compare anabolically to RAD at low doses, however it's more potent and more anabolic at higher dosages. Both seem to be quite suppressive. It's difficult to quantify though due to the lack of studies for RAD. Anavar has much more research and a better safety profile, so I would say Anavar wins this one. I wouldn't use either though, and I do not promote you use either. I'm just saying you shouldn't use them. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you in the next one.